Welcome into Energy Tech Podcast, presented by Opsite Energy. Today we have special guest Adrian Kane from Atmos International joining Mike in the booth to discuss leak detection fundamentals, building a business case for pipeline integrity. Guys, welcome into the show.
Hey, Jeff. Thanks for having us. I am your co-host, Mike Flotis, with the Energy Tech Podcast, right here in Cannonsburg, Pennsylvania, in the heart of the Opsite Energy Control Room. And with us is our guest, Mr. Adrian Kane with Atmos International. Adrian, it's good to have you on the show. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, man. I know, we've known each other in the industry, and we sort of follow a lot of the same industry folks, both in oil and gas and energy. And it's just good to finally get you guys on the show because one thing about Atmos is they have not just compelling products, but it's folks like you that are in the industry. So, this show we're going to really target. It's actually going to be a two-part show, and I think this first one is we're going to talk about some leak detection fundamentals because Adrian is actually putting on a master class in leak detection with us here in Cannonsburg, working with leak detection professionals and regulatory folks and guiding them through what is needed for leak detection. And before we dive into any of that, Adrian, I'd really like to introduce you to our audience that maybe some do know you, but some don't know you in the industry. So kind of give us your commercial, man, where you've been in the industry.
Yeah, I've been in the industry now 23 years almost with Atmos, and I was 3 years before that with a different company. It's been quite a ride. I wasn't really expecting my career to go this way 23 years ago.
Right.
When I started, we were a small company, maybe only 11 people.
Yeah.
And I was in England at that time. And then I think I irritated the CEO so much, she sent me to China.
Okay.
So I spent 7 years there. We were building the whole Asian business at that time.
Sure.
And then in 2013, I moved to the US to help here.
Right.
And obviously, this is the hotbed of leak detection, I think, anywhere in the world, mainly due to the regulations that we're going to talk about.
Sure.
And so, yeah, it's been very interesting working here. And we just continue to expand our customer base and try to get better every day. Well,
I mean, and that's good. Adrian, obviously you love what you're doing. I think I can relate that to myself in terms of systems integration, automation, SCADA. My wife calls it SCADA porn. It's just something it's what I do. I don't have any other hobbies. I don't own a boat. I don't fish, and I don't ski. I basically, integrate technologies, and that's what I talk about. I mean, why do you, obviously there was a point where you said, wow, you're in this business. What is it that you think drives you all the time?
Well, the first thing was what you were saying about the SCADA and the networking and the installing systems. And when you're a project engineer, you do all of those things plus documentation and training and tuning and testing. So it's just such an interesting job. You have so many different things to do each day. Now my role has changed a little bit, and I probably couldn't do any of those things.
Right.
But we're very focused on helping clients and making sure that A, they've got leak detection that's working as well as it can do, and B, that they have the support necessary to operate their business.
Right.
So I think we're much more focused now on what they need day to day. So if they need, rapid assistance from us, we have to be able to provide that.
Right. So, in terms of Atmos International, Atmos is a global organization. I'm sure folks that have leveraged Atmos technologies and tools know that, but for the audience that maybe doesn't, give us kind of the idea about Atmos and, maybe there's hey, Mike, we support a lot of customers in the United States. We support customers globally. This is what we look like. What does the footprint of Atmos look like?
Yeah, very good question. So we have about 2,100 pipelines with our software on it.
Right.
And, one pipeline could be Dakota Access, for example. So it could be 4,000 miles, or it could be 1 mile going into an airport. And those are across 60 plus countries. I mean, I was general manager for Asia at one point. So we were doing lots of projects more or less all over Southeast Asia, including in China. Within the US and Canada, so we kind of view that as one block.
Right. North America? You call that maybe North America?
North America. So we have probably half our project engineers. Now, our development team's not there, but half our project engineers are probably here. We're doing, or we have done about 1,100 pipelines here. So we have a huge footprint in North America.
Right. I got you. And so it sounds like you've got a huge footprint, and you used the word earlier, you called this kind of the hotbed of what's happening. And one of the reasons I think that is, and you can help me, is I was looking at some interesting statistics. So if you're listening in and you're responsible for pipeline regulatory risk, anyone, I want to share something with you, and that is, EPA Civil enforcement on cases and penalties from 2019 to 2024, this is data put out by the EPA, has that back in 2019, the penalty was in the U.S. only. We're not talking about Canada. This is just the United States. $400 million. And going into 2024, at the end of that data set, while leaks and ruptures alone only climbed by less than 10%, the penalty, the civil penalty, has gone to $1.8 billion. So what is that? Almost 3 times the number of total penalties from 2019. And I think what is happening is, whether you call that a political move or administration or anything else, what you're recognizing is that somebody somewhere or groups somewhere are saying they're tired of leaks, or that there's going to be a lifted civil penalty for not having what I call preventable guidance that's in place in the United States. And we're going to talk about that. You're going to deep dive a little bit into that. And what I'm saying is only that the number of cases, while it's only grown a little bit, the penalties for these violations and these spills has increased threefold, at least, into the billions of dollars. And that doesn't even count, Adrian, the reputational damage that happens in an organization, whether you're oil and gas, energy, chemical, and so on, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to talk about the reputational damage, there was maybe 20 years ago, and I know the leak happened before then. If you said the word Exxon, a lot of people would say Valdez, right after a spill in Alaska. And I think the regulatory fines only scratch the surface. The total cost of the leak, by the time you remediate it, let's just talk dollars, never mind.
Right.
Reputational damage, but by the time you remediate it and the interruption to your operations and then your consent to actually operate a pipeline, that can easily reach into billions of dollars. I mean, there was a company had back in 2011 had $1 billion leak. So if you think 2011 dollars to now, it's much bigger.
Wow. Yeah. So I think, that's going to start us off, Adrian, in guiding us. You've been doing this a while, so I want you to kind of guide us in leak detection fundamentals, right? So, I want to establish kind of a why and what of leak detection, because I think that there's some guidance that you give us sort of a landscape, if you will, of leak detection. In this industry where there's, single failures, large failures, for a you guide customers. Where does that strategy start? Like, there's got to be a starting point, because there's a lot of folks that have control rooms just like we do. OpSite is a third-party control room. We serve customers, but there's a strategy that starts somewhere, and you've been in this business a long time. What do you think that is? Where does that typically start for a manager, a regulatory person, EH&S, pipeline integrity?
I think there's 2 aspects to it. The first one is probably risk, which is the one that should probably have the higher weight. And you can go through and you can see if your pipeline goes through a high consequence area.
Yeah.
And obviously regulation is different for high consequence areas versus non. But if you have a pipeline that's a very high risk, and CO2 is going to come in a lot now, it's an asphyxiant. So you have to be very careful if that's near a school or a house or any population center. You have a very high risk that you could kill people. So you definitely have to consider the risk and how much damage could be done by a leak.
Yeah.
But the second one is it a regulated pipeline or not? And I think today that's actually probably the bigger driver. So people are more likely to put leak detection on a pipeline if the regulator says they have to.
Right. So you're saying, hey, Mike, this starts at a simple operational task, and then it moves over into what we're calling a regulatory imperative, right?
Yes.
So what about the people, though? 'Cause, Adrian, I mean, there's lots of, this is common in, only because I've been there, South Texas, West Texas, Louisiana, some of these oil plays, you have gathering systems that in some cases, there may not be a requirement for things that we're going to talk about here, like 1130. Kind of speak to that, because some people, it's an operational task they still have to do, and it's not a regulatory imperative, right? And I'm sure you've seen both customers. I don't know. It's how do you feel like you've approached that in your career over time with different clients?
Well, the gathering networks are not presently regulated, so people are a little reluctant to spend their leak detection dollars there.
Right.
But the risk can be very large, and in fact, produced water is maybe as high a risk as crude oil because it's full of salt. So if it gets on the ground, and especially into the waterways, it kills everything. And it'll leave a huge scar on the landscape where there's no vegetation. The big problem, too, with gathering networks in particular is because they're in shale plays, the wells, they tend to drill lots of wells, they're very shallow, and they don't produce a lot. So it's very difficult even to get the cash flow out of the asset in order to do leak detection. So you could have, like, for example, produced water is not worth anything. I mean, it costs you money. So
Right.
to add leak detection on top of that, creates a lot of extra expense. But it's more than that too, because you have so many different wells that you're either producing out of or pumping into. You need a lot more instrumentation, a lot more bandwidth, a lot more power.
Right.
So the impediments to leak detection are much higher. So our clients are kind of hit with a double whammy where it costs even more than a regular pipeline, and yet there's less money to do it.
I got you. So they're still on the hook is really what we're getting at, right? So, hey, you may not be operating a regulatory pipe, but you're ultimately in, especially shale plays like Texas, West Texas, South Texas, and the Eagle Ford, or, in the Permian, you're still on the hook for that because you're still going to have this saltwater disposal dumped on the ground as the result of this. And you might escape a regulatory requirement, but that's not going to change, like we said, a reputational damage, a legal consequence, or spill cleanups and damage.
Yeah, and in fact, the regulator will come after the fact and say, well, why didn't you have leak detection? And you can say, well, it's not regulated.
Yes.
But they'll still say, well, you're still at risk and you're still liable. So yeah, it's the only thing I will say is the number of pipelines that are regulated now are increasing.
Yeah.
And what we are seeing as part of what you were mentioning with the fines is we're seeing regulators ask a lot more very detailed questions about their leak detection program, and that will tie in with 1130, which I'm sure we'll get to.
Yeah. So understanding that, Adrian, let's start going into kind of a framework for selection, for system selection. You kind of, I think, steer us in that direction. So when an operator says, enough scaring you guys, is the point I'm getting at. Here we go. All right. I hope that, what I did was set this up so that you understand, number one, the federal government's tired of leaks. They're going to fine you. It's a big deal. You're going to have tons of reputational damage. And I think in your career, Adrian, you've seen it. People are calling you only when they've had a heart attack in their organization, right?
Oh, yeah.
I had a heart attack that's going on 5 years, maybe, I think. And I had to make a lot of changes personally. But the only reason I was ever going to do it was because I suffered a heart attack. So sometimes you have small producers, just like large producers. They may be hit hard, and they have to follow the same regulatory requirement regardless of their size. If they have one compressor, one small saltwater disposal battery, that doesn't make a difference if I have 50 batteries. And, I don't think that makes a difference because the regulatory requirement and that consequence could be high, right?
Yeah, The other thing too about the smaller producers is they don't have the internal expertise often. If you're a very large company with many thousands of miles of pipelines, you may have your own leak detection expert or a bunch of them.
Right.
And hence you know what to do, you have experience, you have all of that resource. If you're a smaller company or let's say a refinery, for example, you run very lean, the closest guy you might have might be your electrician.
Right.
And he's certainly not an expert in leak detection, and he has so many hats on, he hasn't got time. So that's one of the places that I think Atmos can really help, because we can bring in the expertise completely across the board, from A to Z.
All right, so let's bring that into kind of a framework for you, Adrian. I mean, there's obviously some way in which you help an operator once they decide to invest, and they say, hey, you know what, you're right. We either operate lean, or hey, we have an in-house regulatory team that you work with. If I'm that small to medium producer, kind of walk us through a framework. I've made the call to Atmos. What does that look like for someone?
Well, the first thing you have to do is figure out what type of leak detection you're going to put in. Jeff, could you put the slide up, please? So these are the two main types. You have internal and external systems.
Okay.
We'll start with external first. The only long-range one that's really used or is viable these days are the optical fibers. If you have a microphone or a camera, you're only talking hundreds of feet.
Right.
So for external systems, the optical fiber is probably a better option than, say, a vapor sensing tube or a liquid sensing tube.
Okay.
Those systems, they're certainly improving, and maybe AI will help with them going forward, but I don't think they're quite there yet.
Right.
And they're also very expensive. So the vast majority of people and the vast majority of pipelines in North America and around the world, in fact, have internal forms of leak detection. So for internal leak detection, you're doing one of two things. You're either doing some form of mass balance.
Right.
And again, most of the systems in North America are mass balance. Or you're doing something with pressure, either a simple pressure drop, or you're trying to catch that rarefaction wave, which can be done in the pressure frequency or at the sonic frequency. But what actually matters with that is the next slide. I hope you're still showing them.
Yeah.
So it depends what instruments that clients have. Because if you want to do a leak detection project today, internal systems use instruments that are already there: flow meters, pressure, temperature, density.
Right.
So if you already have those in place, we can go very quickly with a leak detection project. We can have you completely compliant in 3 months or less. If you have to start adding an instrument, it'll take you more than three months to get a flow meter. Then you have to install it. You probably have to cut. You have to put in, various valving and piping. And then you have to calibrate it. It's a much more different scenario.
Right.
So first of all, we probably start with the instruments.
Okay.
And then once you go beyond that, you're starting to look at, well, what's the fluid and what's the type of pipeline? Say gathering network versus transmission.
Right.
And then the fluid makes a big difference too. If you something that's very uniform like jet fluid, it's very easy to do leak detection. If you have crude oil, is much more difficult because you don't really know what's in it. Okay. And then if you have what I call spongy fluids, like ethylene that are transported in supercritical phase, they're very difficult because you get very large changes in density for very small changes in temperature.
So, all right. So just like in the diagram, you've got and you've got flow. You've got some pressure. You know that these may be standard. If I'm I'm thinking about this. If I'm an operations manager, I do have my typical volume balance because I've got my instrumentation out there. I do have somewhat of a rate of change because I am pulling in a flow. I am pulling in a pressure. Whether that's a 4 to 20 milliamp signal or I'm pulling that in off of a heart protocol, whatever the case is. I'm pulling these things in now. Adrian, what separates that between someone that's doing a real-time transient modeling, because you've got more check boxes there, right? And how do you get that across to an operations manager that says, okay, I've got these things, Adrian, I'm a small to medium-sized producer. How do I move into an issue where I want to detect small leaks, but I don't want to ignore the large ones?
So Atmos offers all of these types of internal systems.
Right.
So what we're trying to do is find what is the best fit for you. Generally, we find we're not keen on very simple forms of leak detection, like something like cumulative volume balance or just simple pressure drop. We offer those systems, but they don't work very well.
Right.
And it's not, the trick with leak detection is not detecting the leak. You can almost always, especially if you have high resolution pressure data, you can see almost everything.
Right.
The trick is avoiding not seeing everything else. Right. So
right. Okay, I get it.
It's the differentiation. So what we look for and what we have found over the years, the most important thing, and I preach about this a lot, the most important thing is the reliability. It's false alarms.
Yes.
So what we're looking at is a leak detection system that's not a false alarm machine.
Yes.
So for those, what we tend to really push mostly on liquid pipelines would be the statistical system.
Right.
If you're trying to do other things, RTTMs can be very good, but much bigger maintenance overhead. And then for special cases, the negative pressure wave can be extremely sensitive and work very well. So we tend to operate within a sweet spot. Let me show you another graph, another chart, sorry. So in this chart, I know there's a lot on it, but basically the darker green is going to be the higher performing systems.
Right.
The lighter green systems we would recommend avoiding for various reasons. And each one of those is quite a long conversation. But depending on what you're trying to do, we would recommend using either a real-time transient model, a statistical system, or a rarefaction wave. And just as an aside, where we're seeing a lot of growth in our business outside of North America is in theft.
Right.
So we don't seem to have a lot of thefts in North America, and the customers are not focused on it. And what we think is it's because there's lots of wellheads that are protected by only a padlock. And you can go and just hook up to a valve right there and get the oil. You don't have to dig up the pipeline. But in the rest of the world, there's a vast amount of theft from pipelines. And it's not just the fluid loss. It's that they tend to be connecting up to these pipelines using equipment they got at Home Depot and doing very bad welds and things like that. And that can go very wrong if they hit the high-pressure gas line instead of the liquid line. But what happens is if these low-quality connections break, and then you end up with a massive leak.
Right.
So rarefaction wave's really good for detecting those very small thefts.
Yeah, so I think that's the posture for, like you said, we've had partners in Mexico and other places that's a common theme for theft. But even if you're looking at the United States, while you don't have somebody connected to your system in South Texas that's stealing, at the same time, there's still the potential for, hey, we could have an anomaly. There's an anomaly, now we've got a leak. So what I'm understanding is what Atmos does is bring a blend of technologies. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It's understanding and staying away from, how can I say this? Sometimes as an operator, there's a mindset. If I'm an operations manager, where it's like, well, Mike, we don't want to go cheap, but we don't want to go expensive. And I think if you just throw those words out and look at the potential for leaks, it sounds like that's what Atmos wants to, what you want to address is that a rethinking, if you will, the rethinking, because you just changed my mind a minute ago. I'm looking at it in the cost perspective, but you're like, no, Mike, we want to see something before it happens, I guess, right? That's kind of the direction that we'll talk about in another episode, but I feel like that's the thinking of Atmos is we want to prevent that, right?
Our number one focus is on having a very effective leak detection. So the key word I always use is it effective? And that's not just whether it can detect leaks. It depends. It's part of your program. there's no point in detecting a leak if the
Right.
operator ignores that leak and keeps pumping. And there have been many documented cases
Right.
of that happening. And that's a case of, regardless of what the technology does, that's an ineffective leak detection program.
Right.
So, and then all that dollar spend you've had on leak detection is for nothing because you ignored that leak alarm. So I tend to go for effective. A term I hear a lot in the industry is affordable.
Right.
But I have no idea what that even means.
Right. Yeah, and that's what I want to get away from, right? Is the cheap, the affordable, whatever euphemism you want to use for it. We don't have a huge CapEx or OpEx spend, right? So you're rethinking what Atmos wants to do or what anybody should be thinking about in terms of leak detection, right? So that kind of leads me to something that we can talk about here, and that's the true properties of a high performance system, right? And this is where 1130 comes into play. And if you're listening and you're an operations manager, you're a regulatory person, the best way I can frame this, Adrian, is sometimes people get involved in changing a diet or health personally. And what they do is they want to follow a framework. They want to follow some sort of plan. They said on January 1, holy cow, I'm 50 pounds overweight. I have to do something. So there is a framework. And I think when people think of APRP 1130, they tend to believe it's this daunting task when the reality is it's just a framework that you can use. And part of that is understanding a high-performing system based on some of the principles inside of that. So I'm hoping you can kind of break that down a little bit.
So if you have an internal leak detection system that's also known as a CPM, computation pipeline monitoring, you are required in the regulations to follow API 1130.
Yes.
Now, API 1130 was written, I think, in 2002, or maybe that was one of the revisions, but a long time ago, as a recommended practice. It was never written to go into law.
Right.
But it is in law now. So there's a lot of stuff in, and the version you have to comply with is the 2012 version. There is a new version that I was actually on the committee that wrote that it's going to be much easier to comply with, but it's not in the regulation yet. So what I find is in 1130, there's a lot of commentary, written by a consultant that's showing how smart he is. But it's not, you can't comply with it because it's a commentary. But what 1130 does is if you follow it, it will help you set up a really good leak detection program. So it's actually, it's a help, not a hindrance.
Right, and I think before you read the document, someone can break it into really four key categories. You'll start at sensitivity, reliability is a key function, accuracy and robustness. They break it into those kind of major sections, right?
Well, those are the. Sorry, my alarm is going off. Time to wake up. Sorry, I came from the West Coast.
Well, yeah.
We'll forgive that. Just today.
I just broke the cardinal sin of broadcasting.
No, we'll forgive the West Coast part. No,
the
alarm's
sorry,
fine. We're fine.
The West Coast part. Yeah, thanks, Jeff.
Yeah. And I've forgotten what I was talking about. So we were sensitivity, performance. So actually, that's only one part of API 1130.
Yes.
So you have the performance side of it.
Yes.
You also have the equipment that it connects to, so SCADA, instrumentation, things like that.
Yes.
And then you have the people. And those are all part of it. And the number one thing I would say to any client out there is if you're required to comply with API 1130, please read it.
Yeah.
I mean, at least look at the index. I've had so many, especially smaller companies, that come to me and go, where's your 1130 certificate? I'm like, there's no such thing.
Right.
So you have to write a document that shows how you comply with that. And the leak detection, the technology, which is what Atmos do, is only a part of that. Your people have to be trained, you have to have procedures, and you have to follow them. And in fact, you have to document that you have followed them.
Yes.
But we were talking about the performance aspect. So that is, once you do select the type of system, then we have to have a look at what those performance indicators are going to be. So can we show this screen, please? Thanks, Jeff. So API 1130, talks about sensitivity, reliability, accuracy, and robustness.
Right.
We've broken out sensitivity into smallest detectable leak size and response time, right? Because they're two sides of the same thing. And then we've added the dollar value.
Yes.
Because if you want to add leak detection system on top of leak detection system and change all your instrumentation to be the absolute highest performance, you could improve leak detection very slightly.
Right.
And you could spend 10 times the cost. So to say that money is not an aspect of this is just not correct.
Right.
Now, what happens in the industry is, especially someone's a little new to leak detection, they become obsessed with the smallest leak size you can detect. It's like, it has to detect a small one. And it should, right? Our goal is to detect every drop of oil instantly.
Right.
But the problem is, when you do that, you're in the repeatability of the instrumentation. So what you're using to detect the leak is no longer reliable at that point. So you will have a lot of false alarms. And if you have false alarms, your operators don't know what to do. So do they shut down? Do they keep pumping? Is it real? Is it not? So I always stress to clients, don't become obsessed with the smallest leak you can detect, because we can set it to be anything you want. It's a number in a configuration.
So what I'm hearing from that, Adrian, is that you're looking at that small one that you might ignore the large leak. Is that right? I mean, is that kind of the thinking here? You're saying, hey, large leaks often go undetected then because you've continued to hunt, or sometimes that becomes fatiguing for someone, right? Especially if you're an operator or something like that. Is that kind of where you're going with that?
Well, there's two things there too. The first thing I've heard many times is, if there's a large leak, I don't need leak detection. My operator will see it.
Yeah.
And that may be true for certain pipelines, but not for all, because it depends on the fluid. Is it, how compressible is it?
Right.
Are you going over mountain ranges? Can you get column separation? So it's not necessarily true that it's very easy to see a larger leak. Now, there is a trade-off between detecting very small leaks and false alarms when you're trying to detect the most sensitive. But I think after a while, it starts to break down, that relationship between false alarms and sensitivity. It's not as obvious, because often, one of the biggest sources of false alarms in the United States is DOT pressure testing. So you have to go to your pressure sensor, you have to manually adjust it from whatever it's reading to 100%, then to 0, and then you can reset it. So if you are still using that as an input to leak detection, and the leak detection system sees the pressure go from whatever it was at to 0, well, that could be a pressure test, or somebody could have put a backhoe through the pipeline. So the leak detection will fire on it like it's supposed to. So there are things you can do. Obviously, you can remove that temporarily from the leak detection system, and there's many ways to do it. But if people don't do it, you get those alarms. But that doesn't matter whether you're just trying to detect a rupture, because that looks like a rupture,
right,
or whether you're trying to detect a small leak.
So where does that lean towards accuracy then? I mean, I would say that's a pillar. How do you relate that to accuracy? Like what's a separator if I'm saying, hey, one of the cool things about Atmos is X in regard to that, right? And for accuracy.
So for accuracy, I think API 1130 is referring to the leak location accuracy, so how closely you can locate the leak.
Right.
But I've also heard it used in the way that, well, what percentage of leaks are you going to catch? So the way the Atmos systems are designed, certainly the RTTM and the statistical is, they will catch 100% of leaks larger than the minimum detectable leak size, right? So the accuracy in that sense is 100%. In terms of leak location, it depends on many factors. Generally, you have very little data to work with, and the pressure is changing so little at your instruments. After you have a leak, you've almost nothing to calculate on. The way to improve leak location accuracy is to have high-speed data. So you put in a separate acquisition unit that's acquiring data at 60 hertz or faster rather than at 1 second or 10 seconds. and then you use the refraction wave method to determine where it's at. So with that, you can get down to tens of feet, but otherwise you're talking hundreds of feet towards the miles region. What we have found in other countries, leak location is the be-all and end-all, more important than and sensitivity even. But in the United States, where you have a lot of very experienced operators,
Right.
they understand that locating the leak's not very hard, like after the fact. You can always go back and find the oil on the ground. That's never their issue. But where you have a big issue is if you don't shut the pipeline down quickly, you go from a very small leak to a very large leak.
Right. And so, we're one of the great things about Opsite Energy and, is that, we do have, especially now joining, will be is a huge piece for regulatory compliance. But at the same time, we lean on partners like Atmos for things. Can someone go to Atmos and find a tool if they said, hey, I have a scenario I want to, let's say that, they're calling, they don't want to call Adrian, he's on the West Coast. Right? He's on the West Coast. We don't like the Lakers, or, I just want to reach out and grab a tool and is that available to anybody in Atmos? Not from Atmos, sorry, as a customer. Hey, I want to reach out and I want to grab a quick tool to help me out. Is some guidance?
A guidance tool or a leak detection tool?
A guidance tool. If I want to start the path right now, we're running a basic model. I have somebody, because Adrian, I don't know how many times I've been to facilities and they've heard of tools, but they don't have them in place. Instead, I have my guy collecting data and then typing. They're doing two things. They're doing some form of data collection for their what they're going to call their own spreadsheet statistical model that shouldn't have, and then it's a person typing information, right? To make it look like, hey, well, we're at least base level compliant. But how does someone reach Atmos to say, hey, we want to help you start the journey of moving into your LDS?
Well, you can start on our website and look at all the various leak detection systems. I generally would prefer if they just called myself or someone in Atmos.
Yeah.
A big part of what we provide is that expertise.
Yeah.
And we can cut to the chase usually quite quickly. If you wanted a quote for leak detection, I have a set of 10 questions.
Okay.
You only have to answer about 6 of them.
Okay.
And I can advise you then very quickly which system's going to be best for you, and we can get to a price right there. But usually within 2 or 3 questions, I can figure out which is the best system for you, depending on what you're trying to do. And I would say rule of thumb, if it's a liquid pipeline, we're going to recommend the Atmos Pipe Statistical System.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's generally start there and then think about other things.
Yes. All right. So we'll start there. Now, at this point, Adrian, we have you, and if you're a listener, we're gonna have a second episode, and this one's Adrian's. We can go long here, but I think right now, we're gonna move into an episode on. We'll come back with a master class that Adrian's doing. Not only is he doing that here in Cannonsburg, but he's going to do a master class on LDS leak detection selection here on another episode for us. So we really want you to stay tuned. So Adrian, right now, we're about to end this episode. If you had the opportunity to tell an operations manager, someone in risk, someone that's running a program, and you could give them some advice about where they can start, what would you say? I mean, how, I recognize there's lots of clients out there, but there are still some small producers, medium producers that sit in these oil plays where they still need help. Like, what is it what piece of advice can you give them to get started?
The main piece of advice is that it's not an overwhelming thing. It's actually relatively straightforward. There's a number of steps, and I have a slide on that we'll save for episode 2, but there's a number of steps that we take, and we will, if you come to Atmos, we will take you through each of them, with some expert led help. So don't get stuck doing nothing.
Yes.
Because there may be, let's say you have a dozen pipelines, and one of them is very difficult, like a slops pipeline that is half empty most of the time. That's not a good place to start.
Right.
So you may have 11 pipelines that are very easy relatively easy for leak detection to go onto. Well, let's start there and get the risk reduced. So everything you do reduces your risk by one step. So if you at least get started rather than getting overwhelmed, I've seen, especially if you involve consultants, I've seen that you get stuck trying to solve the most difficult problem first.
Got you. Yeah, I appreciate that advice. So keep it simple. And with that, Adrian, trust me, we can go a long time, but we're going to save some of it for our second episode here on the Energy Tech Podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Don't forget to like and subscribe to us here on the Energy Tech Podcast. I'm your co-host, Mike Flotis. Look for the links also for Atmos International. And we're going to continue this conversation with Mr. Adrian Kane. Adrian, thanks. This is great.
Thanks, Mike.